When Sandra discovered her cat Missy in the sink that morning, she didn't give it much thought. It had never been in there before, to her knowledge, and it appeared that the animal was now unwilling to exit the sink at any cost. Sandra could hardly believe it when she learned why this happened. The police moved quickly to get to Sandra. She had temporarily locked her cat Missy in another room and was impatiently awaiting the officers' arrival at her home. All she could do was hope that it wasn't what she had assumed it to be. But the officers quickly drove that hope into the ground, as it did not take them long to determine that something was seriously wrong here. They needed to enter Sandra's house's sewers right away. There was no more time to waste. Sandra is stunned that she was unaware of this earlier. Perhaps things would have turned out differently if she had responded when Missy had first entered the sink. Sandra's cat was in the sink, but why? What would the police find in the sewer, and why did she feel the need to call the police? Missy, Sandra's cat, would typically rush to her bedroom door as soon as it opened, hoping for food and attention. Sandra was the only companion for the indoor cat, since there were only the two of them residing in the home. The animal, however, was not around today. Sandra immediately began to feel anxious. Despite her best efforts to cat-proof the home, Missy frequently found herself in precarious situations. What if the cat was unable to escape something that happened during the night? Sandra began yelling for Missy all over the house and even began shaking a bag of her favorite snacks, something that always ensured the cat would sprint as quickly as it could toward her. Not this time, though. The longer Sandra was searching, the more worried she got. Could the animal possibly have found a way out and run away? She always made sure that the doors were locked when she went to sleep, but when she saw the open bathroom door, she was stopped in her tracks by a devastating realization. She had cracked the window of the bathroom the night before so that steam from her shower could get out. She had been planning to close the door behind her, but she had obviously forgotten that. Missy had to have escaped from here, or did she? Sandra ran into the bathroom with tears in her eyes, thinking that she might never see her cat again, and the window was indeed still open. But to the biggest relief that Sandra had ever felt, she also found Missy in that bathroom. The cat was lying in the sink. The animal actually did not even look up when Sandra went into the room, even though she was nearly shouting the animal's name and still shaking the treats around. It seemed dead set on sniffing and scratching the sink's drain as if its life depended on it. At that moment, it did not even cross Sandra's mind that something might be going on with the sink. She was just so overcome with emotions that she still had her cat that there was no room in her thoughts for anything else. She picked up the animal to hug it tightly and closed the bathroom door behind her. Missy tried to get out of her grip at first, but soon just surrendered to all the hugs and kisses, and when the treats were poured into the animal's bowl, it waited no time getting them, but right after eating, Missy made her way back to the now-closed bathroom door and started lightly scratching it while meowing. It was obvious that the cat wanted to get inside, but Sandra was not planning on letting the animal back in for now. If Missy got into the sink again, there was a good chance that she could turn on the water, which would then be running the whole day. She had to get to work now, and thus would not be able to keep an eye on that. Missy would just have to find another way of entertaining herself while Sandra was gone. Because of the search for Missy, Sandra was already late for work, so she had to start rushing a bit. When she walked towards her car, she was greeted by a stranger and a foul smell that she could not place, and she also had no time to think twice about. She just figured that there was something wrong with the sewers, or something, and paid little mind to it. But she could have never guessed that the behavior of her cat and the smell were very much related. Missy knew something that Sandra didn't. Sandra's workday went by relatively uneventfully, and her mind started to drift back to the morning. With her emotions having calmed down a bit and her having some more time now, she suddenly started to wonder what it was that Missy was doing in the sink. The fact that the cat could not be tempted away from there even by treats was very strange, and that it immediately went back to begging at the closed door showed that there was really something going on there. She had ignored it that morning, but now she could not stop thinking about the sink. At the end of her shift, Sandra immediately drove home, and unsurprisingly, Missy was still by the closed bathroom door. She was now sleeping next to it, as opposed to trying to get in, But when Sandra came into the house, the cat started very quickly waking up. With the window now closed, Sandra was confident in opening the bathroom door again, and Missy jumped into the sink within a millisecond and started sniffing at the drain. But something had changed in this room during the day, and Sandra noticed it in an instant. The smell. It was a bit faint still, but unmistakably the same as she had smelled in the street that morning. It had also still been there when she got home. If it was coming out of the sink, it was obvious that something was going on with the sewers. But this was not a normal, nasty sewer smell. Sandra could not place it yet, but she just sensed that something was not right there. She had no way of verifying what this smell was herself, and so she called the police in the hopes that they could come to check it out. But they were skeptical at first. There were not many things more common than a strange smell coming from the sewers. They were basically made for those, and 9-10 times if something was really going on down there, it would flush itself out in no time. But Sandra stayed adamant that they needed to come to check it out. Missy had not been reacting this way for nothing, and Sandra trusted the instincts of her cat, and soon enough, she had managed to convince the officer to send somebody out to come and check it out, and they would not regret their decision. About 20 minutes later, an officer arrived. He was knocking on Sandra's door, and when Sandra opened up, it was a young officer that was checking his phone. He wanted coffee first and didn't seem too eager to check out the sewer. Little did he know. The officer clearly had in mind to convince Sandra to have a specialist check out the sewer. He was young and ambitious, so a call like this was something to finish as soon as possible. The officer was about to leave, and Sandra agreed if he'd take a look at Missy first. He agreed. The officer arrived in the bathroom, noticed the smell, and then saw the obsessive behavior of the cat. He came closer, but was aggressively approached by Missy when he tried to move her. Now he started to worry. The combination of the smell, an alarmed Sandra, and the strange behavior of the cat made the officer decide to call for backup. But during his call, he was told that not many officers were available because many of them were at homes with similar problems. What was going on? The officer was on his own, and Sandra was worried. Was this the help she needed? She didn't have much time to think it over. "Could you please move your cat, lady? It's time to take a look," the officer said. Sandra tempted Missy to leave the sink and took her in her arms. The officer slowly prepared the sink to be examined. He looked hesitant. Sandra felt anxious and wanted to keep Missy occupied, so she decided to leave the bathroom. A few minutes passed, and her anxiety seemed all right after these few minutes. The officers rushed out of the bathroom, closed the door, and demanded the key to the door. Sandra was overwhelmed. What did the officer find in the sink? There was no time for questions. The officer shut the door and told Sandra to come with him. The officer was very persistent, but didn't put Sandra in handcuffs. She was relieved to be innocent, so far, but was still very alarmed by the reaction of the officer. What was going on in her home? Would she ever be able to return home after this? Just when Sandra and the officer were about to leave, Sandra saw the stranger from earlier that day walking toward the building. She didn't recognize him as a resident or a neighbor, but it was already the second time she saw him today. Sandra was sure to remember his face. Sandra arrives at the station and gets installed in a comfortable room at the station. She is offered coffee and a piece of cake. She is even offered to ask a friend or family over for her comfort. It was clear that Sandra was innocent, which was all the more reason to assume something terrible was going on. Sandra's room at the station had a big window. Trying to calm herself down while drinking some relaxing tea, she looked through the window. She was surprised to see more and more police officers coming in. They all surrounded the young officer, who had a lot to tell. Soon afterward, a friendly officer joined Sandra in her room. She looked at Missy in a concerned way. Without looking up at Sandra, she said, "Madam, please tell me everything that happened today, from beginning to start. Very soon after, the police would be very grateful." Sandra repeated everything she had already told so far. The officer didn't seem to be hearing what she wanted. The officer was about to leave, but then Sandra thought of the stranger she had seen twice that day. "Officer, wait!" she yelled. Sandra quickly told the officer about the stranger. The officer wrote everything down and thanked Sandra for this information. All of a sudden, the officer stood up, closed the blinds of the room, and locked the door. This time, Sandra felt very alarmed. Until now, she figured she was the victim, but she felt like a prisoner now. What did this stranger have to do with it? And why was Sandra kept in the dark, even though she was the one who was about to lose her home? These were questions that were soon to be answered. Sandra makes up her mind and decides to call her lawyer. Her lawyer is very shocked to hear about everything. He tells Sandra to stay in the room and wait for him. "You have to come right away," Sandra says, now that she hears a lot of noises coming from the police officers. Only 10 minutes later, Sandra's lawyer arrives. When he enters the room, Sandra overhears the police making plans to make their way to Sandra's home. Sandra is eager to hear more, but the door is closed right away. What were they keeping from her? Sandra's lawyer advised her to wait for now. He seems to think it might be a misunderstanding, but then the lawyer sees Missy. Sandra didn't mention Missy before to the lawyer. By now, the lawyer is much more alarmed because Missy reminds him of a former case that didn't end too well. Sandra's first concern is her cat. She knows her lawyer can't share too much information about former cases, but insists on making sure Missy is safe. Her lawyer is certain of Missy's safety, but immediately says he needs to talk to the police. He leaves the room. A few minutes pass. Sandra sees her lawyer come in, who wipes the sweat off of his forehead. He talked to the officer in command and made a discovery. During the time Sandra was locked away in the room and awaiting her fate, the police made an arrest. Sandra is invited to the office of the leading officer. She and her lawyer entered the room, where she sat down in tension. The officer revealed that they had arrested the stranger. Sandra is relieved that something was done, but is still unsure about what was going on. But the truth was about to be revealed. The officer tells Sandra that they're currently at her home, fixing the situation. Sandra responds, "What is going on? What is the strange smell? And what did this stranger have to do with it?" The officer replies calmly, "That will all become clear if you have a look yourself. Are you sure you want to know?" Sandra is sure. They get in a police car and are escorted to Sandra's building. The leading officer himself drives Sandra and her lawyer. Sandra realizes the serious nature of what is going on. They soon arrive, and Sandra can barely see her home. All sorts of special cleaning forces and a lot of police officers are around the building. Sandra comes closer and is led to the sewer below the building. The leading officer comes along and reveals the truth. A virus was released in the sewer, causing many rats to die. The smell was a result of all those poor deceased rats. The stranger turned out to be the scientist responsible for creating the virus. He feared the high amount of rats, and this was his way of controlling the pest problem. The police were looking for him, even before all of these events. Sandra was allowed to return home later that night. She and Missy have been happily living there together ever since.
Did you like this touching and surprising story? If so, we invite you to leave us a comment expressing your opinion. If you want to continue enjoying inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel or check out the other videos shown at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for your cooperation.